Hi, folks. Hello, and thank you for joining the webinar today. We're going to give folks another moment to log in, and we'll be starting soon. Thank you. All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Better Buildings webinar. Dedicated to bringing you the latest actionable insights from leading industry experts, Better Buildings webinars are a chance to explore the topics, technologies, and trends that affect your organization, as well as efforts to accelerate decarbonization and energy efficiency adoption. So today's, next slide, please. Today's webinar is Growing Your Green Team, Engaging Residents and Staff for Successful Decarbonization Projects. Before we dive in, there are a few housekeeping points I'd like to cover. Please note, today's webinar will be recorded and archived on the Better Buildings Solutions Center. We will follow up when today's recording and slides are made available. Next, attendees are in listen-only mode, meaning your microphones are muted. If you experience any audio or visual issues throughout the webinar, please send a message in the Q&A box located on the bottom of your Zoom panel, and our tech support team will be in touch. Next slide, please. My name is Josh Geyer, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. I work in the HUD Office of Environment and Energy and serve as the multifamily sector lead for the Better Buildings Initiative. Next slide. Today, we're looking forward to showing how thoughtful and meaningful engagement can lead to better use of new technologies, greater emissions reductions, and improved quality of life for residents. This webinar will explore strategies for empowering residents by integrating resident and staff involvement into every phase of a decarbonization project, from design and education to implementation and promotion. Today, we will hear from two speakers with lengthy experience in successful resident engagement, discuss strategies for shaping project design and building consensus and support through thoughtful, meaningful engagement. Afterwards, we'll have time for our speakers to address your questions before we wrap. Next slide. Today's webinar is presented by the Better Buildings multifamily sector. In February 2022, HUD was excited to join the Department of Energy to launch the Better Climate Challenge. Multifamily housing providers that join the Better Climate Challenge commit to the ambitious goal of reducing their portfolio-wide greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% within 10 years. Together with the DOE National Labs, we are providing technical assistance to help partners overcome barriers to decarbonizing their portfolios, forums for peer-to-peer exchange, and a national platform that demonstrates partners' leadership in addressing climate change. If your multifamily organization is interested in joining the Better Climate Challenge and being a leader in decarbonizing the U.S. multifamily building sector, please contact me. My email is on the last slide. You can also learn more about the Better Buildings multifamily programs by visiting the Better Buildings Solutions Center website. Next slide, please. Today, we will also be using an interactive platform for Q&A polling. Please go to www.slido.com on your mobile device or by opening a new window in your internet browser. Today's event code is #DOE. If you would like to ask our panelists questions, please submit them anytime throughout the presentation. You can also upvote questions that other folks have submitted. We will be answering your questions near the end of the webinar. Next slide. I'm really excited to hear from our two presenters today, Ed Pauls from National Housing Trust and Alicia Garcia from Piedmont Housing Alliance. Thanks to both of you for being with us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Thanks. To begin with, I'm pleased to introduce Ed Pauls. Ed serves as a senior director of real estate for National Housing Trust, NHT, and is responsible for performing financial feasibility analyses, evaluating due diligence materials, assessing financing options, preparing financing proposals, and managing projects through the development period on behalf of NHT communities. Prior to NHT, Ed was a senior development officer at the District of Columbia Housing and Finance Agency. Ed received a Master in City Planning degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a Bachelor's of Business Administration from the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Josh. I didn't expect to get my full bio read out. It's exciting.
How it
Um,
goes.
yes, thank you and welcome all. Can we have the first slide, please? So my presentation today is about NHT's background and history and how we work with residents through our properties. For those who don't know, the National Housing Trust was founded in the early 80s. It was originally founded as a federal policy organization focused on preservation of the existing affordable housing. And as federal funding was being cut back in the 1980s, the trust was founded to advocate for renovations and improvements in existing existing affordable properties across the country. As we moved into the 1990s, we started to grow expertise in working directly with property owners and became kind of a mini consulting shop. And then in 1999, our property ownership entity, NHG Communities, was founded, and we bought our first property in 2002. Can I have the next slide, please? That moved us into working directly with residents on a day-to-day basis. And our first property was here in DC, in the District of Columbia, which has a very unique law, which I think is maybe one of the only in the country that's like it. It's called TOPA, which is an acronym for Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It kind of became the foundation of how we do our work with residents, because the law gives residents of multifamily properties an opportunity to purchase their building when an offer for sale is put in. The law works such that any property with more than 4 rental units has to submit any offers to the DC government. The DC government then sends those out to a few organizations who send those out further to those who might be interested, and works to break. And there's a time period by which residents can partner with other organizations or get financing and purchase the building themselves at the same price as the original offer. We have been selected 13 times since 2002 as partners with resident organizations here in DC. And like I said, that kind of became the foundation of how we work because what the law does is it gives residents both legal and financial leverage, both with existing owners and with potential owners. And so we negotiate directly with tenant organizations, and they have normally a list of things that they want to see at the properties, both current and operations, and hopefully for future renovations and improvements. And we come up with a development agreement, a signed legal contract that says that it makes it such that we have to do certain things, and if we don't do them, the residents in some cases will have other opportunities and can go other directions. So it's harder work as an owner, I will say, because you have an extra set of eyes, and in some cases many eyes, keeping an eye on you and making sure you're doing the right thing. And sometimes it can be difficult to manage the expectations of a broad group of residents, because different residents will obviously have different things that they want to see happen at their property. It does keep you honest though, because you really have to work day to day with the folks who are at the property. Our first rule is always that you have to work to build trust, and that takes time. It's something that you build over time. And the first part of that really is interesting. You actually want to make sure you don't overpromise, because if you tell residents, especially very early on in a process, that you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and those are difficult, time-consuming things, they will hold you to that, and they will expect it. And you have to make sure that you early on set expectations properly and how long things are going to take, because as we know, development process can take a very long time. I am currently working on a project that we are in year 9, and we have not started construction yet on the new property. I know the project that Alicia is going to talk about in Virginia, I think they've been in the planning process on that for 10 years. And that's, a multi-phase project that can take a long time. So really setting expectations is very, very important. And it can be difficult because often you'll have other parties involved who want to kind of sell folks a bill of goods and promise things that they can't actually deliver, and the residents will believe them. And so really working to build trust over time is an important part of that process. I realize that in most jurisdictions there isn't a law like TOPA, but I wanted to highlight it because I think it set the bar for how we want to interact and work with our residents. And it's something that we do. This type of work is something that we do in most of our properties in most jurisdictions. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, it's an interesting thing because when you work with residents, we were talking about this with Josh and with others before. When we were doing this planning, I said, there's a fundamental disconnect that I think is really tough to understand if you don't work with residents on a consistent basis. A lot of folks sit, in an office or in your home office and are kind of technical, especially at this kind of work. You get very focused on, here are the upgrades we want to do. Here's what the energy efficiency is going to look like. Here are the systems that are going to be in place. And that's important. Obviously, it's very, very important. It's the crux of what a lot of us do. But it's also very separate from what residents feel on a day-to-day basis. Those aren't necessarily things that they are focused on. And the difference is being, of course, that for us, this is our professional work. It's something that we do for 40 hours a work week, maybe some of us 50. And it's something that we do in constrained time periods in the middle of the workday generally. And when you work with other people professionally, you have professional boundaries and limits. When you're talking about residents at a property, it's where they live, right? They're there. Probably 2/3 to 3/4 of their lives are spent in their apartments and in their homes. And their other residents aren't their other professional partners and colleagues. They are people who live in other units and apartments and homes. And the boundaries there are a little less defined. And so when you talk with residents about the property and about things that they want to see improved, they're not going to necessarily say, oh, hey, I really want energy efficiency. That's just not going to be something that they care about first. You might hear, it may be something that some of them care about, but you're probably more likely to hear when you start out with the resident group saying, hey, crime is a real issue here. Or this thing, the fire alarms are going off all the time, even though there's no fire. Or management doesn't respond to maintenance requests. Those are the things that when you first start talking to residents, you generally hear more about. And so you really have to meet people where they are, and recognize that if you come in saying here and you just focus on energy improvements and efficiency, and these are the fun new systems, and it's going to be great, you're going to get, I don't want to say blank stares, but you're going to get a lot of folks who are going to say, that's all great. That's all fine. It's not really what we care about that much, or it's not necessarily top of our priority list. And so again, you have to kind of start from where people are and work with them. What we found is that stressing improvements that save money, obvious, big wins for folks to say, hey, if your utility bill is going to go down, we expect it to go down by 25%. Something like that. That's a big, right? That's an immediate thing that people will latch onto, understandably. Talking about things like indoor air quality, very important, especially obviously if they have children, focusing on those things. And then trying to come up with ways that you can involve residents so they can get excited. We often have events where we have where we're doing renovation and we do plantings of trees and bushes and things like that, and we make it something we work with nonprofits in the area, as well as inviting residents directly. Really those hands-on events, and you can see a picture here of a health fair, so again, focusing more on the health side of things and the way that air quality in this case might be impactful for residents is a way to really engage folks. And I'll note that this is from a picture from our Hazel Hill property, which is in Fredericksburg, Virginia, about halfway between DC and Richmond. It's again an older property that we've owned for, I want to say 16 years now. And this is a property that we are starting a major renovation on. So it's kind of a good example of this kind of work, because if you go back to the first slide that Josh had about 50% energy savings, not every property is going to be brand new. And in fact, most aren't going to be. Most, right now the population is kind of stable in the country. And so a lot of the way to really get major reductions is to improve existing properties. And that takes, if you want to make 50% gains in energy efficiency, you have to do major renovations. So at our Hazel Hill property, we're doing this major renovation. We are taking out the gas lines, going fully electric in the property, doing major renovations, major improvements, heat pumps, everything electric, as I said. And that's actually being funded through one of the first grants of the GRRP program. We were awarded that last year, and we're closing
That's
on
the
that
Green
this
and
year.
Resilient Retrofit Program.
Thank you, Josh. Yes, GRRP. So we were actually among the first awardees last fall. And this property, Hazel Hill in Fredericksburg, Virginia, as well as the Kindlewood / Friendship Court property that Alicia is going to talk about, were among the first awardees of those. And Kindlewood is a great example of a new construction project on that. And so that obviously you can take advantage of those improvements from the beginning. But as I said, it's very important to have these events and things that residents can latch onto. And that's a way to build connections and build trust. Because like I said, trust is something that builds over time. And we're talking years here, years of engagement. And it's about going and meeting folks on monthly basis, bi-monthly basis, even sometimes quarterly. But showing up in person, being there consistently is very, very important. Can I have the next slide, please? And that's again about building relationships. And so number one here, in-person meetings. I can't stress this enough. Again, it's funny to say this on a webinar. I think a lot of us in our professional world are probably pretty used to doing online meetings now, especially in the post-COVID era. They are important, and they're obviously a way to save a lot of time for some folks and logistically easier. But when it comes to meeting with residents, and residents can do them, we certainly did a lot of them in the COVID era. The engagement that you get is so much less, and it's important as a way to kind of communicate basic information. But when it comes to making those relationships and building that trust, it's much less impactful than being in person. And so that can be difficult, right? You have to have folks who are accessible and able and ready to have those in-person meetings and be there. For the Kindlewood project, as I said, that's in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is almost a 3-hour drive from DC. So it's important for us that we have a partner in Piedmont Housing there in Charlottesville to kind of really work with residents on a day-to-day basis. But we still have our development folks out in meetings there, I think once every 2 months or so. And those are pretty involved meetings in some of those cases, as Lacey is going to talk about. Related to that, in-person meeting connections, building trust, over communicate. I personally am the type of person who doesn't like to push people too much. I like to trust them and their ability to get back to me, do the things they said they were going to do. And what I've noticed is that when it comes to working with residents, you really want to over communicate with them. You want to remind people of things. You want to say, hey, this event's coming up. We have a lot of our on the ground folks, our resident services coordinators, as we call them. They are very good at really reaching out consistently for events and activities and making sure people are going. That kind of personal touch and over communication is really important. And obviously that ties in with the third one here of being very accessible. One thing you will notice as someone who works with residents, if you give your email and your phone number, people will contact you. Sometimes when there are problems, even if you're not necessarily the right person to fix the problem. But it's, again, important building trust to be very accessible and get them connected to the right person who will fix those problems and help work on them. The last thing here I have is talking about little wins. Sometimes those big wins, those, the big renovations, the big improvements like we're doing at Hazel Hill, like we're doing at Kindlewood, those can take years and years and years. And you will find that trust declines over that time. We have a property here in DC that we're doing a major renovation on. And it took us 6 years to get the financing in place from the time that we acquired the property. Because of various slowdowns and issues related to the DC government, their operations, and then COVID hit. And we actually almost sold the property because we were in such a difficult position that we were losing money on it consistently. And it was difficult meeting with the residents because we were having these quarterly meetings and updates of where we were. And you could tell that it was, they were very unhappy. The property was in very poor shape and we just didn't have the money to make the upgrades that we had promised when we acquired it. And so one of the things that we did was while we were waiting, and actually just after we got our award, our actual award to our funding award to actually be able to do the renovations, but we still had a 9-month period before we put everything together. We said, well, we have to do something to show the residents that we're still involved here, that we're still active. And so we actually we had our office staff, many of whom are policy folks and finance folks who don't work on properties in any way day to day. And we had about half of them volunteer over the course of a week to paint and kind of fix up the community room at this property here in DC. And that little connection was really valuable because we also had residents involved in that painting and cleanup and all of that. And for them to then see the property and come by, and they come to the community building in the management office on a pretty consistent basis, and they have programs there for kids. And for them to see that we cared and that we made that effort, it was not very costly for us, obviously, but that we were still involved, and that was a huge minor thing. That was like a little win that showed that we're going to take them all the way to that big win of the renovation. And now we're about halfway through the renovation of their apartments. So, I think these are some basics of how we work and what we do. The other thing I'll note is that one change that we've made, we started about 5 years ago, was having a layer of staff at properties that are not property management staff. They're what we call resident services coordinators. We have them at most of our properties in the DC region. Outside of the DC region, normally have a local partner who might have staff like this. Some of the smaller properties will have half-time. They'll work at 2 properties over the course of a week. And we call them resident services coordinators, like I said, and they serve as a layer of basically just assistance to residents directly. So they're NHT employees, they're not employees of the management companies on the site. They do also act as an important go-between for the management company, but they serve as sort of advocates and guides for residents, and also literally coordinating services among service providers at the property. And what we found is that having those people on the ground, again, this is back to just building trust and relationships, having those people on the ground on a very consistent basis, that's their connection to us as owner. And when we didn't have, 5 years ago, when we didn't have NHT staff at the property on a consistent basis, we were very distant. We were the owners, quote unquote. And I'm sure that if you at one of our properties, if you had asked, probably 80% of them would have had no idea who NHT was. They wouldn't have, because when they write a rent check, it's to NHT Kindlewood, or sorry, it's just the Kindlewood Preservation Partners LLC or something like that, right? So whatever the owner entity name is. And so even though we might have meetings consistently and talk with resident chairs and presidents, and they know who NHT is, the day-to-day residents didn't. And having those services coordinators, those people to really have that one-on-one touch on a consistent basis and in relationship with, has been a huge difference. And it's something that's really changed the way that we work with our residents, and that they see us, hopefully. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alicia to talk more detail about our Kindlewood property that we are partners with them on, and that's, as I said, in Charlottesville, Virginia, down in the on the edge of the mountains down there. So take it away, Alicia.
Yeah. So thank you. I'll introduce. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, no worries. So just a couple programming notes, I guess. So one is that something that Ed, what you were saying reminded me of is that we like, if you're in the affordable housing space, or even more specifically the affordable housing energy efficiency space, like, yourself that you are like in this for like the public good and to like improve people's lives. But that is something that you can't assume that other people, like the folks who are residents in these properties, are going to assume. Like you have to you have to go out, like Ed was saying, you have to demonstrate them that you are committed, that you are, so that they see you as a person who actually has their best interest at heart, and not like kind of part of a machine. Another programming note is that so for those of you, I see there's over 200 people on the call, and welcome to all of you. For those of you who are not aware of this, The Green and Resilient Retrofit Program is a $1 billion program that was funded for the HUD Office of Multifamily Housing through the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the Biden-Harris administration's signature climate policy. It is the most significant piece of climate policy in world history. So just for people for anyone who's wondering, well, what did we get out of this past 4 years in terms of climate? Only the most significant piece of climate legislation in the world. It far surpasses anything that any other country has done. It's so aggressive that many of our allies are ticked at us because of how aggressive we're being. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so just a reminder to the audience, go ahead and type your questions into slido.com and we'll address them at the end of the session. Our next speaker is Alicia Garcia. Alicia brings nearly a decade of experience working in affordable housing development with a focus on large-scale redevelopment initiatives, housing policy formation, and small area planning. Prior to joining Piedmont Housing Alliance, Alicia served as Vice President of Real Estate and Community Development at the Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority, where she oversaw the transformation of Richmond's public housing communities from initial planning and community engagement through securing necessary funding sources to financing redevelopment projects in partnership with development organizations. Previously, Alicia worked in New York City for the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, managing large-scale affordable housing development across the 5 boroughs through the inclusionary zoning program. Alicia holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Virginia Commonwealth University with a focus on community revitalization strategies and housing policy solutions. Please welcome Alicia.
Thank you, Josh. And good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I am the Director of Real Estate Development with Piedmont Housing Alliance. We are a small nonprofit in Charlottesville, Virginia, where we have active development happening at an array of sites, both in the city of Charlottesville and in Albemarle County, where our focus is creating affordable housing opportunities for residents, as well as racial and equity opportunities for our BIPOC community in the city of Charlottesville and surrounding counties. If we could advance the slide deck, please. So today I'm going to be talking about the redevelopment of Friendship Court, which is now known as Kindlewood, excuse me. If we go to the next slide, this image shows what the community has looked like throughout the years. So you'll see that in the 1960s, this community was a predominantly working class African-American community with a mix of owner-occupied and rental units in the area. Through the urban renewal program, the community was deemed as blighted and many of the homes were demolished. By 1978, you see that Garrett Square was developed as a 150-unit Section 8 project-based community. Later in 2002, Piedmont Housing and NHT partnered together to purchase Garrett Square, and we renamed the community Friendship Court. As we move ahead, PHA and NHT took a resident-led approach to create a master plan for the redevelopment of the community. This redevelopment was renamed as Kindlewood, which was a name chosen by the residents. As we go to the next slide, please. We took a very resident-led approach as a part of our redevelopment efforts. We not only listened to the residents in the engagement process, but we made them partners in the process. So through our engagement, we learned that residents wanted to see the community of Friendship Court reconnected to the surrounding neighborhood as how it's developed as a Section 8 community. It's a very large block scale development with the grid being cut off at the site. They also wanted to see different affordability opportunities for families to be able to live there, as well as wealth building opportunities. So these became some core focuses of the redevelopment for Kindlewood, as well as a core focus being zero displacement. So every person who lives at Friendship Court would have a home on the newly redeveloped Kindlewood. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we really made this a resident-led approach. It was truly resident-led. They became decision makers with us through the redevelopment effort. It was from this core belief that we created and established an advisory committee, which you see our lovely advisory committee members on this slide. They have worked to re-envision Friendship Court while adhering to those core principles I discussed. So that zero displacement principle, as well as ensuring we're doing robust, authentic engagement that allows for shared power with those tiers of affordability that we heard about through the engagement process, and that this site would develop more than just housing. Next slide, please. So the residents and the advisory committee were really a part of our master planning process. They chose what this space would become, what it would look like, where buildings fit best, what they wanted their green space to look like and where it was located, really making the decisions of what the look and feel of the community would be, as this is their space that they live in. They worked with us through choosing anything from paint colors, carpet colors, to interviewing our general contracting partner on the phase 1 redevelopment that we've just completed. If we could move to the next slide. The redevelopment of Friendship Court will be done in 4 phases. This will result in replacing all 150 units that are at Friendship Court today, as well as adding additional units to the site. So we're thinking an additional 250 units will be added to the community of Kindlewood. The homes will be tiered affordable rents in a phased approach that displaces no one. So phase 1 started as being developed on vacant land that was on site at Friendship Court. So nothing was demolished, no one moved while this was being constructed. Our phase 1 consists of 100 units, mixture of townhome and a multifamily building with green space there. So we had 46 families from Friendship Court move into the phase 1, and 60 additional units were created for residents of Charlottesville to apply and live in. The next slide will show phase 2. And I do want to note phase 1 has completed construction and we have families living in those units. Phase 2, we are looking to close on in December. And this phase will consist of 104 units. 4 of those will be community land trust homeownership opportunities, along with a community resource center, which will be the offices of Piedmont Housing Alliance, offer community space to our residents to be able to use for events or hosting, as well as space for an early learning childcare center, which we heard was a need through the engagement sessions, that the residents wanted a place they could send their children for childhood education at rates they could afford. So that will be included with phase 2, along with rental units, where 54 families from Friendship Court will move into the replacement units, and additional units created for families to apply for and move into. And on the next slide, we have phase 3, which will finish out our replacement units with 50 families from Friendship Court moving in. We'll have approximately 20 additional units constructed for those to apply and live in. And then as we go to phase 4, on the next slide, you see it is right now a gray box, but we will go back to those community engagement sessions with our Friendship Court residents and our new residents we welcome to Kindlewood, to really plan out what we want that phase to look like. We do know it will have housing on it. We're thinking there will be ground floor retail, but really we'll go back doing that robust community engagement to determine what best will serve our residents in the surrounding community. Next slide, please. So keeping on to wanting to do climate resilience as a part of what we discussed with our residents in the engagement process, we made sure the buildings at Kindlewood are certified under the Enterprise Green Community Certification, which is a standard that is a national standard for green built affordable housing. We're taking that further by also pursuing zero energy ready homes, which is a certification that ensures that we're meeting significant energy reductions through passive house strategies, which include increased insulation, robust air sealing, and thoughtful mechanical specifications. So really strongly sealed building that's energy efficient that residents will be able to benefit from. In addition to that, the buildings are designed to be solar ready with roofs hosting maximized solar arrays. So this image is an aerial view of our multifamily building in phase 1. You see the solar panels have been installed on the site. This building and all of our buildings as a part of Kindlewood's redevelopment are master metered with the residents units having sub meters. So we're able to allocate the solar energy production directly to the residents' utility bills. Funding deals that are affordable takes a village and a lot of funding sources, and Kindlewood has an array of funding sources. We use the low-income housing tax credit program to pay for this redevelopment, along with additional tax incentives that are provided through the Inflation Reduction Act that encourages energy efficiency construction. This project was also awarded the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program funding through a leading edge commitment in the amount of $6 million. So we will use that $6 million as a part of our phase 2 closing to pay for those energy efficiencies that we're doing in that phase. And we've also used funding from the state's Department of Housing and Community Development through their Housing and Energy Efficiency, HIE, funds to pay for energy efficiency work on site. Last but certainly not least, PHA received donations from supporters in Charlottesville who wanted to see this redevelopment come to life. We've raised approximately $5.2 million for this project to pay for the permanent financing for our community resource center. So through those donations, we were able to build that resource center as a resiliency hub and place for our residents to go and enjoy community sessions and send their children to that early learning center, as well as PHA being able to have their offices on site at the Kindlewood community. The next slides just show some images for you. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see the front of that multifamily building you just saw an aerial photo of. We have residents actively living in it. There's a fitness center in this building as well, space for residents to do fitness classes. There's community room, packaging room, a lot of things for the residents to be able to enjoy. They have really liked having all of this on site and available to them and really enjoying their new units. And the next slide shows a rendering of what our phase 2 will look like. So we have a mixture of townhomes and multifamily unit. Again, this is closing the first or second week of December. We're just working out finishing touches on that closing. And then the final slide shows the community resource center. So this is a rendering of what that resource center will look like. Again, having space for our residents to enjoy, as well as that early learning center for the community to send their children to for early childhood education. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Alicia. So what I want to kick off the Q&A portion of this event. To take a chance to ask you both the first question, but in the meantime, for the audience, please add your questions to Slido by going to slido.com and using the code DOE. I had a couple of things that, as I was listening to you, I wanted to ask. So the first thing is, I mean, I think so. To me, shared decision-making, shared design, and then decision-making is the acme of equitable development, redevelopment. So what are the most important ways to ensure, or strategies that you can undertake as an organization to ensure that residents have meaningful involvement and agency from the beginning to the end of a redevelopment process?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a big one, but we certainly did find it's their community, so we wanted to make sure it looked and felt the way they wanted it to, and that it met the needs that they wanted to see on site. Think the biggest part is that being in person, that Ed mentioned earlier in his presentation, that we're out there, that they know our faces, and that we're walking alongside them with this process.
Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing because oh, did I forget? Oh, sorry. It's a tough. It's a. I would say I want to be realistic for folks about timelines and
Mhm.
expectations. That's I think is a really big one. That um, it's it's difficult to balance all of the various parties that are involved and the permitting agencies and financing and all of that. Um, and also involving residents because sometimes you have a long time and you can kind of make plans and really sit and say, hey, we're going to do this in sequential order and make this decision, this decision, this decision. And then other times it's like, oh, this permitting thing is coming up and it has to get done like that. And so there's no formula, but I do think it's really important just from the beginning to set those expectations and get as much of that planning as you can early on during that period. We have a lot of time because sometimes things will happen very quickly at the end. And hopefully you'll have enough information from the residents when you do have to make those quick decisions that you don't have time to go back
Mhm.
to, sit down with everyone.
A kind of related question is this is something that occurred to me is so you were talking about projects where you're waiting you're 8 years in, you're 10 years in, you haven't started redevelopment. How does that work financially as the redeveloping entity? Like how do you like that's a lot of it seems like that's a lot of kind of staff effort to be floating for like a long period of time. How does that work like financially?
Well, it depends. So those are the ones that I'm talking about that are that long. Normally they're properties that we own that are existing operational. And so hopefully those are still cash flowing and they don't have a direct cost to the organization on an ongoing basis. And we'll have staff like myself kind of periodically keeping an eye on it. We're not actively working, week to week on it. We're waiting for funding periods to open up and things like that. What is harder is once we kind of go in deep and we say, okay, well, we're going for this funding period, and that's a year away. And then we really start to have to devote time and energy paying consultants and things like that. Then we're making a significant commitment, and that's really where we go at risk. So each project is a little different. The really tough ones are ones where, and we've only really done this twice, where we acquire property that is in really bad shape and it is not cash flowing. And we are having to fund it consistently on a month-to-month basis. And we recognize that from the beginning, from the original acquisition, and we felt like there was a good funding opportunity that wasn't 8 years away; it was 1 or 2 years away, and we could bridge that period. But that's a big risk, and you're taking a lot, and that's not something that we do easily. And we have become much more. It was something when the funding, especially here in DC, when the funding environment was a little bit less risky, maybe 5, 6 years ago, it was something we were more willing to do, and something we did a little bit more often. And back in our history, we can see that some of our older properties. It's not something we do nearly as much anymore. It's just too risky. The costs are too significant. So there's definitely a balancing act there to play.
Yeah. So I see there's a question here that kind of dovetails with one that I had. So the question is, how important is it to communicate the benefits of greener buildings through a multifaceted lens to different stakeholders? How do you approach and meet them halfway? I would add to that so the way that I would think about it is, how successful have you been at framing energy efficiency as a vehicle for achieving other improvements the residents want to see?
I'll let Lisa take that one first.
Okay.
It's a
Well,
big one.
thanks. Yeah, I was writing it down to make sure that I got everything. I think, Ed touched on this well, is that energy efficiency isn't always on the forefront of residents' minds when we're planning and talking about this. And when we're saying we're going to put solar, they're like, okay, how does that benefit me? So we really tie it into understanding that utilities can be a point of stress for families. If their electric bills get too high, water and heating get too high, they can be at a crossroads of what to do. And while there is funding opportunities out there to assist with utility payments, especially in summers and winters in a lot of localities, that's not necessarily always available, and there's not enough funding for everybody who needs utility assistance. So when we're coming at the approach of we're creating this really tightly insulated building, I think it's good to go at it from the impacts of, hey, it's going to help keep your cooling bills down. It's going to keep your heating bills down. And explaining solar has definitely been something we've been learning a lot here at PHA as we do solar on all of our development projects. Explaining what that means for the residents and how they'll benefit from it has definitely been a learning curve we've been addressing and explaining, hey, this is how it'll look on your utility bill, and this is what the solar is going to do, not just for you, but for the building in general. So really honing in on those focuses, as well as just, reminding them, the windows that they have at Friendship Court, for example, allow a lot of air to come through. And, through the redesign at Kindlewood, you're not going to feel those same draftiness that you're feeling in your 1970s built home.
Go ahead, Ed.
Well, I was going to say just a couple of examples. My colleague actually is on, and he sent me a Teams message reminding me of these. One thing that we did at our Hazel Hill property actually was we asked very specifically about issues in their apartments and specifically about energy efficiency. So like one thing that we got was that there was poor distribution of the HVAC system of the air, and that there was a lot of unevenness in air temperature in their apartments. And we did a duct leakage testing process and figured that out and confirmed the issue, and then we had a way to fix it. So there was a very kind of hands-on, this problem, here's the solution, right? So that really helps as an example. The other one is actually at the Hazel Hill property that I talked about, that I had the picture of the residents at the health event. There was a major gas leak at the property. I think it was, I want to say 2016 or 2017. It actually became a pretty big issue down in Fredericksburg. It was in the newspaper because it's a big property. It's over 200 apartments. And so and it was in December. So having 200 folks without heat in December was a pretty big issue, and it was something that got attention. We activated very quickly. As soon as we figured out what was happening, it was actually a problem with the underground distribution system. So we had to work with the gas company directly. Very costly, as you can imagine. We got space heaters to residents within a day or two. Anyone who needed to, we got them into hotels. We ended up getting a lot of positive feedback on that, the fact that we moved so quickly and that we responded so quickly, and people recognized that we were putting in a lot of effort and spending money. And that oddly helped build some goodwill, especially among kind of some of the political leaders in Fredericksburg, because they recognized that we were being a good actor and that we truly were the best interest. To your point, Josh, like we weren't some faraway owner who just, hey, that's the property owner, who knows what they're going to do. Our head of development at the time, Scott Klein, went down, talked directly with residents multiple times. So a lot of those folks are still at the property. And so now that they see that they remembered when that issue, the gas leak happened, and the uncertainty that caused them. And so now when we went in and say, hey, we're going to take out the gas system, we're going to go all electric. Now there's a direct benefit, and they have that history. So kind of two examples. Admittedly, they are specific. They're not necessarily broad, but I think that there are ways that we can work with residents on a consistent basis to show them those benefits. But it's not obvious always, right? Sometimes it takes some trial and error to figure it out.
Yeah. So you're not recommending that you like sabotage your
No.
underground gas in order to okay. I just wanted to go to that.
Not a good idea.
Yeah. So another kind of curiosity that I have you had any, so obviously utility bills are issue number one, followed by thermal comfort. Have you had any traction talking about the benefits to tenants of greater resilience and greater like health, like air quality?
I would say a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think it's not really top of mind, I think, for most folks, because it feels kind of distant. We actually had a property in DC that we just finished a renovation on a couple of years ago, and we were trying to decide whether or not to take out the gas stoves. And I think if it had been up to us, we probably would have done it. But the residents pushed back and said, no, they wanted them. And at that point, induction cooking, we were doing this planning in 2019 and 2020. And at that point, induction cooking wasn't quite as well known. And so we didn't really push as much maybe as we might have now on that. But that's an example where I think that some of those arguments were made and they were kind of like, okay, I get it, but we really like our gas and we're used to it. And so we don't really want you to change it. So that's it's an interesting example of kind of that balance of working with residents.
Yeah. So for this is a question that came through the Slido. For Kindlewood, what are strategies to remain engaged with residents while they're displaced from their units during renovation? Obviously, a huge question across all different kinds of redevelopment projects.
Yeah, so our residents remain on the Friendship Court site, living in their units until it's time to move into the redeveloped Kindlewood. So phase one was built on vacant land, so no one had to move off site. They just move when the units are ready. So that's something we make sure to instill zero displacement through development and post-development. But a way we do stay engaged with the residents is by having monthly community meetings with them, just to answer any questions that they may have, provide them updates. I'll say specifically right now, as we're closing on phase two, we're about to have a fence come up and fence off the site for where we're demolishing and redeveloping on site. That is a huge impact to residents, and it's an even larger impact to those who live closer to where the fence is going on site. So something that we're doing is having intentional one-on-one sessions with those families that are going to be living near the fence to talk to them and explain that, hey, we understand that this fence is being built and it's going to be really loud around you. Talk more to us about that. Do you need any accommodations that we need to be aware of if we're not already aware of accommodations families need? And just checking in on them on a regular basis. I will say also, as a part of that fence going up, there's a concern about parking, as the fence is going to be taking away a lot of parking that can be used now. And that community is very close to downtown Charlottesville, where parking is already very limited. So we're having conversations with residents about what parking will look like, and again, touching on reasonable accommodations families may need if they need a spot adjacent to their home, and what that will look like. So just very intentional outreach to those families.
I just want to flag something that you just said that along the lines that we've been talking about of creating the relationship, creating trust and credibility. You saying, come talk to us. We know this is out there. You were invited to come talk to us. And then you're creating an opportunity for you to then respond in a way that's substantive and addresses their comments. And that is one way to help create the trust that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
You'll also, again, like Alicia said, you'll often get those questions and issues about things that aren't things that necessarily you had on your mind, or they weren't front and center for you, but they're front and center for the residents. And so, and sometimes you can't fully solve their problem, right? And what we've noticed is that over time, if you show the residents that you're engaged, they will hear you and they understand that you can't solve every problem, but you have to show that you're engaged consistently for them to give you that leeway.
Yeah. All right, so I have one last question, which there's several about this. So with any multifamily property, there's always going to be some level of uncertainty between what your modeled energy savings and cost savings are going to be and what they ultimately are. So how do you have any just thoughts or tips, recommendations about how you do modeling that you think works, and how to then determine how well your modeling did and make any adjustments after the fact?
So I have to admit, I'm not the expert on this. My colleague, Michael Miranda, is. He's the kind of the person who manages this for us. But what I'll say is that we do pretty intensive because we have someone on staff. This is an unusual thing, I will admit, for most housing owners, is having a sustainability person on staff who really understands the stuff in depth. And that's a huge benefit to us. We have extensive databases that we pull of all of our properties, and we pull in utility data from all of our properties on a monthly basis, and we use it both for internal tracking as well as for a lot of external reporting. In DC, there's a lot of external reporting that we have to do because of various district laws, and so we've kind of gotten used to doing that, and we do it on a consistent basis. So we can track that really closely. And we have a couple of third parties that we work with at some of our properties. As Alicia said, a big part of it is when you're doing renovations, putting sub-metering in, so that you can pull, because that actually gets you better data because you have access to the meter directly normally, and you can pull that data directly versus getting it from the meter that's owned by the utility company. It's not a perfect system. When we underwrite, we don't assume like if our model shows a 30% savings of utilities, we're not going to quite assume 30 in our model, just because we don't want to come up short and might assume 25 or 20. But we do assume some savings. So it's not, yeah, it's taken us a while to build up that infrastructure, I will say.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna thank you to both of you. Can we have next slide, please? On here. So obviously, thank you to both of you. And I will say, while I'm going through the coda here, please feel free to jump on the Slido and directly address any of the questions that you think are kind of the most interesting. This webinar is a part of the Better Buildings 2024 Fall Webinars lineup. As you can see, we have a great collection of presentations every Tuesday through the end of the year. Visit the Better Buildings Solution Center to learn more and register. Next slide. So we hope you will join us on November 19th for our next webinar titled From Smart to Smarter, Advances in Industrial Control Systems Improve Efficiency. Join this webinar to explore real-world use cases of industrial smart control systems and gain insight into benefits, challenges, and implementation opportunities. Next slide, please. Next, we are pleased to announce dates for the 2025 Better Buildings, Better Plants Summit. The summit will be in the heart of Washington, D.C. from April 30th through May 2nd, 2025. In addition to engaging in interactive sessions, attendees can look forward to plenty of opportunities to network with their fellow industry peers and experts. Subscribe to the summit's email list on the Solution Center to hear the latest on registration, sessions, and more. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to thank our presenters, Ed and Alicia, for taking the time to be with us today. Please feel free to contact our presenters directly with additional questions, or if we could not get to your question during the Q&A period. I encourage you to follow the Better Buildings Initiative on LinkedIn for all the latest news, and make sure that you're subscribed to the Better Buildings Multifamily Initiative's newsletter, chock full of useful information every month. You will receive an email notice when today's recording, slides, and transcripts are available on the Better Buildings Solutions Center. So everyone, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.